CM Punk appeared on the MMA Hour with Ariel Helwani last Monday, and as is usually the case when Punk speaks, all hell has broken loose. It made headlines for all the obvious reasons, none of which had anything to do with WrestleMania. Sort of reminded me of what happens to AEW a lot, right? It happened during MJF's run as champion, where the weekend of a pay-per-view, there would always be some kind of drama that drew attention away from the show. Now, WrestleMania is big enough that that was never going to happen here. But Ariel did spend a lot of time with him asking about what happened in AEW. And I thought he did a good job of asking the kinds of questions that people would want answers to. And Punk was more open and forthcoming with his answers than I thought he would legally be able to be. You know, for all this talk about NDAs. He did say there were NDAs signed relative to Brawl Out in 2022. So he couldn't talk about that, but he spoke on everything else, from the incident at Wembley with Jack Perry, the events leading up to it with the glass spot, his thoughts on Tony Khan as a boss, and Colt Cabana. My overall thoughts are that it was nice to get Punk's point of view on things because we have not had a chance to hear from him publicly about this, only what he and his friends would leak to Nick Hausman. My opinion of his behavior in all of this remains unchanged. There's a lot of what he said here that I do agree with. That is a very bad look for Tony Khan and AEW. But my opinion on the way that he acted and AEW firing him, that hasn't changed. My opinion of Jack Perry, not so much, if what Punk said here is true. And my opinion of Tony Khan's role in this and the Elite is also unchanged. And that's not to absolve them of anything, because there are no completely innocent parties here. Not CM Punk, not the Elite, not Hangman Page, and not Tony Khan, especially Tony Khan. And I think Cody Rhodes summed it up well on Ariel's show on Wednesday when he was asked about what Punk said. And Cody said it all comes down to miscommunication. I would say a lack of communication more than a miscommunication. And this is coming from someone with a communications background. That's what started this entire thing. And Tony Khan allowed it to fester enough to the point where it was like a powder keg, which eventually exploded. More than once, in fact. This could have been handled in the spring of 2022. And here we are in the spring of 2024 with CM Punk back on the WWE roster. How did we get here that we are still talking about this shit? Let's start with the AEW stuff. And again, just for the record here, because I did not have time to get into this during the week. I did see the entire interview. I watched it all for myself. I heard everything he had to say, and he talked a lot about WWE and his return, and I'm not getting into any of that. I want to focus on some very specific things AEW related that he talked about here. And we're going to start with Ariel asking him about his arrival in London for All In, because this was a story at the time. Remember, Punk was photographed, he was taking the tube, he was taking the train to the show because there was no car there to pick him up from the airport. Punk said, there's nobody there to pick me up, and it's not a big deal. I just got on the tube and I was like, adventure, and you have to figure it out for yourself. That part was fun, but it's completely irresponsible as a company to leave somebody stranded at the airport. But I understand the sentiments, people, all the smarties on Twitter, oh, can't you just take an Uber? The crybaby. I never cried about it once. I'm still the guy when I fly in and out of Chicago, I take the blue line home. I'm not trying to be super fancy and shit like that. I don't know if he was told that there would be a car there to pick him up and then there wasn't, or if he just assumed that there would be because there was in the past. If he was told that there was and then there wasn't, he would have every right to be upset. I'd be pissed about that too. If not, I still think that you have a car there to pick up your top star. I don't see it as anything super fancy. You know, Tony Khan would not let the guy go the first time when he claims he wanted to quit, and Tony said no because he needed him for Collision. Without CM Punk, there is no Collision. If you have a star that is that valuable to you in your eyes, then send a fucking car to pick him up at the airport when he lands in a foreign country. It's not that hard. I still don't think there was any grand conspiracy, though, on the part of the EVPs to cancel the man's travel just to fuck with him. Because I know that was a popular conspiracy theory that, the reason there was no car is because the Bucks, they manipulated the travel itinerary, or they said, hey, make sure there's no car there. I don't buy that. I don't believe that to be the case. Then Ariel asked him about Jack Perry's match with Hook at Wembley, and him looking into the camera and saying, real glass, cry me a river, after he did that spot on top of the car. Punk said he was in his locker room when it happened, and he said it was obviously directed at him. He said, Tony's big idea was separate shows. We're going to separate everybody. And I said, that'll never work. Just let me go. Just get me out of here. Pay me my money. I've already been off TV. I hurt this arm. Just get me out of here. And he said, no, can't let you go. Why? Just let me go. Who cares? These guys don't want me here. This isn't a real business. This is not a business predicated on making money, drawing money, selling tickets, doing business. It's not what it was sold to me as, so let me go. Let's stop there. I said the minute that it was reported that Tony Khan was going to separate the rosters and have Punk on Saturdays with his people and the Elite on Wednesdays with theirs, that it was a terrible idea that would never, ever work. Punk is correct. He was smart enough to know that also. Unless they all agreed to sit down in a room together and at least agree to coexist and be cordial with each other. And even then, there was no trust. And once that trust is gone and that trust is broken and you got to walk around with eyes in the back of your fucking head, it just doesn't work. You can't work in an environment like that. I don't care what business or company or industry that you're in. You could be behind a desk working a 9-to-5 job. If you don't trust the people that you work with, you're not going to be there for very long. Because that's not a way to work. So this was only ever going to end in disaster, whether it was at Wembley or some other time. Punk was right. Tony should have let him go then. But Collision was predicated on Punk being the face of the show. And without him, there would be no Collision. But Punk is the one who went off in the brawl out scrum. Punk is the one who, by most accounts, threw the first punch backstage in Chicago. Tony Khan getting rid of his 2 EVPs and keeping Punk was not going to happen. So he had to make a choice. Instead, he thought he could put a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. That doesn't work. That never works. Punk saying that AEW is not a real business and that it's not predicated on making money or drawing money, that to me is largely just him lashing out at the Bucks, not wanting to do business with him after Brawl Out, so that they could all work together and they could all make money. AEW is a 5-year-old company making millions of dollars off of its television deal with a possible renewal coming in the next several months. 70,000 plus tickets sold to Wembley Stadium last year. Another 40,000 plus already sold for this year's show. They employ so many people right now that they only now are starting to cut people and scale back. You can't say that it's not a real business. You can disagree with Tony Khan's approach, and I'm going to get into the roster cuts that were made this week and some comments that he made a little bit later on I thought that were completely tone deaf. We'll talk about that later. You can talk about the emphasis on dream matches over storylines that draw people in. They have stories, they're just not all very good ones. It does feel like Tony is more interested in booking fantasy matches for hardcore fans and that he himself wants to see. It feels like he's using AEW as his own e-wrestling simulator. And that's fine sometimes, but it comes at the expense of more interesting stories. Stories that draw you in and engage you. I actually think, one thing that they could borrow from WWE, and maybe make it even better, is their use of backstage segments to tell stories. The typical backstage segment in AEW involves one person being interviewed, or one team being interviewed. And then maybe you have people interrupting them. Rarely, though, on TV. Maybe they do this on social media. But rarely on TV do we get segments where you need to pretend that the camera is not there. It's like we're kind of eavesdropping on something that we're not supposed to be seeing. WWE has done a great job of using those segments, for example, to tell the Bloodline story. Especially when Sami Zayn first started hanging around, right? Remember when Roman Reigns let him in for the first time into his locker room and they're sitting on the couch and those segments were fucking gold. Those were some of the most entertaining segments that they did. That's where a lot of the storytelling came from. We don't get that in AEW. And I think it's a missed opportunity for them to use those segments to better flesh out a lot of these characters. Like, they'll come out and, Justin Roberts will introduce them and I know who they are, but that's it. And that may be the only time we see them on the entire show because you got to fit so many people on the show. And they don't take the time to really flesh these characters out in those types of scenes in the way that they should. WWE did something once on SmackDown many years ago, like 20 years ago. And then they never did it again. I would imagine because it's a hard thing to shoot. But I would love to see AEW or another wrestling promotion try this again, where it was like one continuous shot that started in the back with one segment and then it bled into another and then another and then another, one right after the other. Like one person would walk off, like they have a conversation with someone and they walk off down the hallway. And you see them walking down the hallway, but then as they're walking away, they walk past the conversation that's happening between two other wrestlers. And then we just very seamlessly pick up with that shot. Like, that was innovative at the time. And then they never did it again. But that's the sort of thing that I think would really benefit AEW from a storytelling perspective. And I know this is not going to sit well with some AEW fans who are just going to dismiss it as, oh, you just want them to copy WWE. No, I want them to borrow from something that works and make it their own. But to Punk's point, no wrestling company, I don't care how rich the owner is, falls ass backwards into all of these things that AEW has been able to do in its first 5 years. All of these accomplishments that the TNAs and the Ring of Honors of the world would have killed for in their first 5 years. That WWE would have killed for in its first 5 years. We forget sometimes the company is like 75 fucking years old. So you can't just kind of wave your hand and dismiss all of that. Well, they're not a real business. They're not in it to make money. All these things that they have done and they have accomplished wouldn't happen unless they were doing a good job of building a business. Now, again, you may disagree with the approach. You may think, why is Tony doing it this way when he could be making more money by doing it that way? AEW may not be profitable yet, but they could be. They could be one TV rights renewal away from being a profitable company in the next few months. And to just dismiss that as, oh, they're not a real business and they're not in it to make money is wrong. Punk wanted to turn it all into a storyline with the Elite and make money off of it. They didn't want to, so he lashes out and says they're not a real business. My stance was and has always been, and if you've listened to any of these rants about this, and I'm so fucking tired that we're even still talking about this shit, but my stance has been consistent on this from day one, that the Young Bucks, as EVPs in the company, had a responsibility to at least sit down in a room with Punk and Tony Khan and the lawyers if need be, have a little mediation session, and hear the man out. Because it was always Punk. The reports were that Punk wants the meeting. Punk wants the meeting. The Bucks don't. Now, if at the end of that meeting, had they taken it, if they still had no interest in doing business with this man, that's their call. But I think that if you have talent that is doubling as executives in the company, that is very different than Darby Allin, let's say, getting into a fight with CM Punk and then saying, I don't want to work with this guy. Even though Punk and Darby is a feud that could make them money. The Bucks are in a unique position. Them and Kenny. They are EVPs, which means they need to consider what's best for the entire company and not just themselves. They're smart enough to know that this segregated roster stuff was never going to work. Punk was reportedly willing to meet with them. They were not willing to meet with him. Take the meeting. Hear what he has to say, and then decide what you want to do. They didn't do that. They ghosted him with these claims like, oh, you're not allowed to. The lawyers say you can't talk to each other. Give me a fucking break. But I think that's really what Punk is sore about more than anything else. Now, on the events that led up to the Jack Perry altercation, it dates back to Collision, an episode of Collision and the Real Glass incident. Now, according to Punk's version of events, he's sitting in catering one day, he's minding his own business, and Tony Schiavone comes in and he gets Punk and says, hey, I really need your help. Jack is cussing me out. He's cussed out Mike Mansouri. He's cussed out Daryl from production. He's cussing out the doctor right now. Why? And Punk says, I was immediately like, dude, he isn't supposed to be here because he's a Young Bucks guy. He should be on Wednesdays. He goes, he's not supposed to be here. I was told people are getting separated, so there's no problems. And you don't want me involved in this because if you don't handle it, I'm going to handle it and you're not going to like the way that I handle it. So according to him, Schiavone keeps on begging him now, please, please, please. So he drags Punk out of catering and Hook and Jack Perry are shooting an angle. And he says, I don't know anything about Jack going on vacation, which was, again, that's the whole situation was that Jack was going on vacation, apparently. I don't know for how long, but he was going on vacation and he wanted to do some kind of an angle involving real glass and a car. Punk says there are a litany of people that work 1 day a week and they don't want to, so they want to show up and wrestle and then film vignettes and then sit at home for 4 weeks. Great. Not my company, do what you want, but not on my show. That was my attitude. I walked up to Jack. He was sitting in a car. What he wanted to do, it was a rental car, was smash the window of the car with a pipe. And I was like, it's a rental car. And I very politely, because I like Jack, I was like, Doc has told you no. Daryl has told you no. Mike has told you no. Schiavone's told you no. And now I have to tell you no. And apparently you've cussed them all out. So I'm telling you no. We don't do that here. If you want to do this, go to Wednesday and do it. He had no problem. He said, okay, I just thought it was a really cool idea. And I said, well, it might be, but this is a rental car. Boys ruin it for the boys. You're going to smash the window of a rental car and you're going to return it with no fucking window. And now whatever, national budget, Hertz, whatever, is going to be like, don't rent cars to pro wrestlers anymore. This is a thing that's happened. Wasn't trying to throw my weight around. I wasn't like, hey, this is my show and you got to get out of here. I was like, this is fucking dumb. To come to this new show when everybody is supposed to be separated to get rid of all the drama and then swearing at the doctor because the doctor's like, hey, it's real glass. Shit's going to go in your eye. And I get it. I used to be that kid that was like young and I want to do this, but there's a safe way to do it. I politely explained that to him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cuss at him. I was just like, I very much just said, we don't do that here. This is Saturday. It's a different show. You want to do stuff like this, do it on Wednesday. And that was it. I didn't think there was going to be a problem. He obviously took something very business-minded, very personally, and that's fine because I've done that before too. But it's very much who he's friends with, and shit never got squashed. Nobody's in charge, and it turned into what it turned into. Now, Conrad Thompson on his podcast with Schiavone asked Tony if the story was true. Tony didn't deny it, but he also wasn't happy about any of this. He said, did he have a couple of stories about me? Jungle Boy, right? You know what? I really don't give a shit about it. I'm not going to get into this. I know what he said, and let him continue to talk if he wants. That's all I got. I can't get into it. It would be stupid for me to get into any of this. If we take Punk's comments at face value, and I really have no reason to think that Punk would be making this part up. Tony Schiavone not thinking it was a good idea, by the way, was one of the versions that was reported at the time. So I can believe that Schiavone would have gone to him and said, hey, I need your help, and, we got a problem here. So if all of that is true, then Jack Perry sounds like a prima donna who thinks that he is a lot bigger than he really is. Why is he going around cussing everybody out if that's what he's doing? And if Tony Schiavone is so distressed over it that he has to go find and beg CM Punk to do something about it, obviously that's very inappropriate for Jack Perry to be doing that, and he sounds like a dick. But there's a bigger question here. Why is Tony Schiavone going to CM Punk? Right? Punk may be the face of the show. I mean, Punk said it there himself. This is my show, right? Okay. Well, it is, but it isn't. It's really not your show. You might be the reason that there is a show in the first place, but it's not your show. It's Tony Khan's show. So why is Tony Schiavone going to CM Punk and not going to his boss? Tony Khan is at every single show. They don't do house shows. There are no shows where Tony Khan is not present with a headset around his neck. Go find Tony Khan and let Tony Khan deal with it. If you have a talent that is being abusive or difficult to work with. It's one thing if there's a disagreement over a spot, like some kind of creative disagreement. Hey, Punk, can you go talk to Jack about it? Fine. What Punk is describing here, again, if it was any other business and one of your workers was going around cussing people out, it would be dealt with by management or that person would be fired. It's like I said before, nobody is innocent in this. Then came Wembley. Jack Perry, during his match with Hook after a spot on a car, looks into the camera and says, "Real glass, cry me a river." Punk sees this and he goes to Tony Khan. He said, I was like, "Please handle that, please." And he was like, "What do you want me to do?" I was like, "I'm not telling you what to do. Just be the boss, please. I'm tired of this shit. I told you this was a mistake. I told you separate shows wasn't going to work. And now we're all here. And please handle it." Jack came back from his match. I was the next match. I'm sitting there. I got people with me. I'm not going to say who they are. I got a lot of friends who work there. I don't want to get them in trouble. I walk up to him and I'm just like, "Jack, why do you insist on doing this dumb internet shit like this on TV?" And he's like, "If you got a problem with it, do something about it." And I was like, "Man, come on. I would fucking kill you. What are we doing here?" I thought I was doing the responsible thing. I didn't punch anybody. I just choked somebody a little bit. Samoa Joe was there, told me to stop. Then I quit. I turned to Tony. I said, "This place is a fucking joke. You're a clown." I quit. I went to my room, and then Joe and Jerry Lynn came and got me, and they're like, "Let's just go out there and kill it." And I was just like, this is the last time I'm ever going to wrestle Samoa Joe. This is my last match in this company. I quit. I said I fucking quit. And Helwani asked him, "So then why did you go out there?" And Punk said, "For Joe. For Joe, for Paul Turner, the referee, for Jerry Lynn, the agent on the match, because I respect him. And I thought it was the professional thing to do. All the fans, a lot of fans there, probably a lot of them to see me. So just go out there and give them a show." And on how Punk would describe working for Tony Khan, he said, "He's not a boss. He's a nice guy. And I think ultimately that is a detriment to the company. But it's not my company. I thought I was brought in to sell merchandise and tickets and draw numbers for pay-per-views and stuff. And I clearly did that, but that's not what the place was about. And some people didn't like that." That really is the key part of the interview. Let's go back to the altercation here. Punk thought that he was doing the responsible thing by not punching Jack Perry in the face. He only choked him a little bit. Punk loses the right to take the moral high ground when he choked his coworker. This is the point that cannot be glossed over. You cannot make excuses for this. Some people simply cannot bring themselves to admit that this man bears any responsibility at all for his actions and for why he was fired. They're just ride or die to the very end. Keep in mind, Punk was fired with cause. So if he thought that he was fired unjustly, or he claims he quit, but he says he wasn't fired, but if he thought they slandered him by saying that he was fired with cause and it wasn't true, they didn't fire me, like there would have been a lawsuit. There was nothing. He had no leg to stand on. Because he choked his coworker by his own admission. And AEW has footage of what happened with Jack Perry backstage at Wembley. That was known even at the time. There was security footage. And I never thought that it would see the light of day. Of course, I'd love to see it, just like morbidly curious. Of course, I would watch it and love to see what happened there. But so much time has gone by now. Punk doesn't even work for the company anymore. It's time to move on. Unless you're Tony Khan. And here we are now with AEW on Collision last night, announcing that this Wednesday on Dynamite, the Young Bucks are going to present backstage footage from All In and will, quote, discuss it for the first time. Now, when I first read that, I didn't think it was real. I had people sending in messages while I was trying to talk about WrestleMania. Now we're talking about AEW shit on Saturday night. We're talking about fucking All In at Wembley from how many months ago? 7 months ago, whatever it was. I'm trying to review WrestleMania Night 1. I got people saying, oh, they're going to show the footage on Wednesday of Perry and Punk. And I'm like, what the fuck? So I thought it was a joke. Then I saw the announcement, and I thought, okay, well, surely it's just going to be a storyline to put heat on the Bucks, and it's going to be footage of like FTR or something to build heat for their match at Dynasty in 2 weeks, because FTR is in the finals of the tournament for the tag team titles. The Bucks are in the finals. They're going to be squaring off. But everybody now, from Meltzer to Sapp to Alvarez, are all consistent now in saying that the footage that is going to be airing on Wednesday is not a bait and switch. This is not a swerve. Tony Khan is actually going to air footage of the CM Punk Jack Perry incident on TV this week on TBS. And that he was very upset by Punk's comments. He wanted to show the footage previously. For whatever reason, he opted not to. And now he's using this opportunity to finally air it for the world to see. Now, Tony Khan won't say so publicly, but he was said to be very upset by Punk's interview. Of course he would be. I mean, that's hardly a shock. But he was so bothered by his comments that he sent Adam Copeland out there on Wednesday to open the show for an 8-minute rah-rah speech to rally the troops and put over how great AEW was. Even if it was Copeland's idea, Tony Khan could have said, you know what, I appreciate that, Adam, but we're going to leave it alone and we're going to move on. We're going to look forward. He sent him out there, and it was so transparent why he did. They did not need to waste almost 10 minutes of the program defending themselves. It was embarrassing. And for all of Copeland's talk about wanting to focus on the positives of pro wrestling, because that was really the crux of his speech. There's so many good things happening right now in pro wrestling, so many fun things. Why can't we focus on the positives? And there are plenty of positives in both companies. But Tony Khan also bears some of the blame for the tribalism that exists online today, because he feeds into it with some of the comments that he makes and that the other wrestlers will make on the show in their promos occasionally when they reference WWE. You cannot in one breath say, tribalism bad, let's all hug and sing Kumbaya, and then in the next breath, tweet up a storm about how sad it is that WWE had to load up NXT in October with huge stars just to pop a rating. Or any number of things that Tony Khan should have just kept to himself. If that's what you want to do, then fine, go for it. But spare me the, oh, why can't everybody just be positive speech? Hey, Adam, talk to your boss. So now 7 months later, 7 months after Tony Khan fired CM Punk, they still need him to pop a rating. All the big free agent signings have not worked, so he's using the hook of the Wembley footage and CM Punk to draw a number. It is pathetic. If Punk is lying about the way things went down and he wants to set the record straight, you know what? Put out a brief statement online addressing it. Share the video there. Them promoting it for their television show is pathetic. Like, I cannot even believe that we are sitting here in April after this happened in August. Punk is long gone, and this is what they're spending their television time on. CM Punk is going to be sitting ringside tonight for the World Heavyweight Championship match at WrestleMania, part of that whole story. And Tony Khan is getting footage, backstage footage of the backstage area at Wembley Stadium in August of last year, all teed up to air on his television show here. Like, are they bringing back Jack Perry? Is he joining the Elite? I don't see how airing footage of their guy being choked out is actually going to be a benefit to him. But this whole thing is pathetic, even if Punk is lying about the details and they want to expose him for it. This is not the way. They come off as just petty and insecure. Very insecure. Punk made the point that Tony is a nice guy, but he's a detriment to his own company. That's the sentiment of a lot of people. He seems like a nice guy, but he doesn't take charge of these situations. And, you know, if he did, a lot of this drama probably could have been avoided. I'm talking going all the way back to the Hangman Workers' Rights promo in May of 2022, or even before that, when these rumors started circulating in the locker room, apparently, that Punk was trying to get Colt Cabana fired. If in fact, he was not doing that, but people were hearing that, then Tony should have squashed it right then and there. As far as the Jack Perry stuff goes, we'll see what the footage shows. But it does not change the fact that CM Punk had to go. He assaulted his co-workers twice, with no evidence that anybody swung at him first, and that he was only defending himself. I mean, one incident was enough to get rid of him, and I said that after Brawl Out. I said he should be gone. After the scrum and then the backstage stuff that went on. I said it then. It took them a second incident. We went from Brawl Out to Brawl In, and then finally that was enough. That was the end. The disciplinary committee chimed in, Tony Khan made the final call, and CM Punk had to go. And after the second time, you got no choice. Doesn't matter how big of a draw that person may be. Now, there's just two more quick things on this that I want to chime in on, because Punk talked about at Brawl Out, or I keep calling it Brawl Out, at All Out, before Brawlout happened later that night, he got injured in his match with Jon Moxley, tore his triceps. He said in the interview, "Nobody in the company spoke to me for 6 months. I paid for my surgery. I booked my surgery. Thankfully, Doc Samson, who I knew from WWE, helped me with that. I was on my own for all of that stuff. In one place, there's structure and protocols and professional people in charge of things, and I'm not having to research and find a physical therapist. I had no help. Nothing. That's insane to me. Is that how they treat Jaguars players? I don't know, but I don't think anybody should be treated like that, especially when you are a professional athlete. I had no help. Nobody would speak to me." Now, unless they thought he got hurt in the brawl that happened later that night, but it was pretty clear he was hurt during the match, the way he was grabbing at his arm. Even during the scrum, I think he said he was hurt. But them not communicating with him at all after that night is insane. And he's not wrong about that. And if he got hurt during the match working in their ring, then they should have taken care of the surgery. Now, maybe there's legal reasons they didn't reach out, but that doesn't make any sense. I mean, he still worked for the company. He is your top star. You're a world champion, in fact. How is there no communication there? Again, it all comes back to that word. It all comes down to communication. It's like friends who fight, and then they give each other the silent treatment because they have too much pride to be the first one to pick up their phone and call or text the other person. Like, what are we doing here? Now, Ariel asked him if there was any chance of him burying the hatchet with he and Colt Cabana, and Punk said probably not. He did admit that Cabana approached him. Now, this would have been sometime before the events of Brawl Out. I don't know how many weeks or months before that, but he said Cabana did approach him one day to talk so that things would not be awkward between them, being on the same roster. And Punk said that he told Colt he will never talk to him without a lawyer present. So he's upset that the Young Bucks didn't want to talk to him, but Cabana tries to bury the hatchet or at least converse so that things aren't weird between them. And he says, "I won't talk to you without my lawyer." Amazing. And yet, through everything I've just talked about, Punk did say, he did admit he made a lot of great friends there. He got to work with Sting in Greensboro. He said, "I think the positives definitely outweigh the negatives." Maybe for him, personally, but for AEW as a whole, I'm not so sure. As evident by the fact that the biggest match being promoted on their television show this week is CM Punk against Jack Perry.